Okay, thank you for joining us today, everyone. My name is Anastasia, and I am the Director of Programs here at BC Tech Association. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are grateful to be virtually gathered on Indigenous land, regardless of where you are joining us from. At my home in Vancouver, I am grateful to be on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. A few housekeeping notes to start off with. First, we would like today's session to be as interactive as possible. So I would ask if you can please turn on your video so that we can see each other. And second, to please add your company name beside your Zoom name. See mine as an example. All you need to do is click on the three dots on top of your video box and select rename. We will drop the instructions in the chat as well. Okay, as many of you are aware, BC Tech is dedicated to two things: making BC the best place to grow and scale a technology company, and advancing technology as an engine for growth in every company. Our challenge is that our tech companies are small. The threshold to be in the top 10% of BC tech companies is only 50 employees versus other market like California, for instance, where you would need an employee count of 500. It is a pretty stark difference. We know that moving the needle on this specific challenge can have a significant impact on our province economy, which is why scaling is so important. Through the HyperScale AI program, we will accelerate your scale journey by addressing the gaps that may limit your growth and connect you with the resources you need to be successful. And you can see our schedule of expert sessions coming up for the next few months, and it's going to be very exciting. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to extend our thanks to our partner, Scale AI in Montreal. Canada's AI supercluster shares the same goal as BC Tech, to address the issues in our supply chain and provides the funding to make this program possible. Scale AI is the hubs of Canada's AI ecosystem, offering funding, expert guidance, and a community of like-minded peers for AI projects and training. I also would like to thank Deloitte for being a community champion of HyperScale AI, and we are very thrilled to have Erica Pretorius from Deloitte moderating today's session. Thank you, Erica. It's good to see you. I am now pleased to kick off our fireside chat this afternoon on the topic of building your AI team. Please use the chat function throughout the conversation to ask your questions, or wait until the Q&A portion if you want to ask your questions live. Your moderator for this chat today is Erica from Deloitte. Erica is a partner in risk advisory, leads the telecommunications, media, and technology practice in BC, and she is also the national leader for the Technology Fast 50 program. A lot of you are already familiar with the program. She is sought after to evaluate clients' internal controls and risk regarding systems and data, outsourcing, IT implementations, and privacy, and she helps expanding organizations to manage their IT risk to promote efficient growth. Erica is a frequent speaker on issues relating to cyber risk management, women in technology, and mentoring. Joining Erica today is our guest speaker, Shifani from Facebook. Shifani is the machine learning tech lead for the meeting assistant team at Workplace from Facebook. She is leading the development of conversational AI for making remote collaboration easier for work. Previously, she built and launched the foundational machine learning and AI stack for Facebook Portal, spearheading product and engineering development across social graph technology for ML, depersonalization for a smarter calling experience. Shifani has emerged as one of the leaders in talking about AI and machine learning for consumers as well as enterprises. And we are so happy to have her with us today. Welcome, Erica and Shifani. I will pass it over to you, Erica.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anastasia. And it's great to be with this group. It's lovely to see this focus on AI within our community. And we're very happy and proud to be part of the BC Tech program. So thanks so much for having us. And also really nice to see some Fast 50 companies on here. We love it that we have so much great representation from BC. So as we kick it off today, I'm sure you're all really keen to hear from Shivani. Shivani, why don't you start by introducing yourself a little bit more and tell us more about what you do?
Thank you so much for the incredible introduction, Anastasia. I am so excited to look at this group of people. I'm very excited to learn more about what you all do. What I do is go into teams which don't yet have ML, and this is very interesting. It's a great intersection for this group as well, and essentially see how can we optimize user experience or just the experience of the product by introducing machine learning and AI within the tech stack. And so I've done that previously in the Facebook portal team, and also now in workplace. And I'm excited to share more about my journey with all of you and share the little I've learned on the way as well.
Excellent. So that's a great start. I think one area I really want to focus in. So you say you're going into businesses or functions and helping introduce AI. Are you finding that the desire to use AI in general is coming up first, or is there a business problem that the groups are trying to solve, and then AI comes in? Like where do companies normally start or groups normally start?
Great question. And glad we jumped right into it. This is one of the biggest questions of whether or not are you ready for AI is the question. And I've talked about this extensively, but I really like to say evaluate your need in two ways. And these are the two questions that will if you find the answer to this, you will know whether your company is ready for AI or not. The first one is whether the problem I'm solving is solvable by simple rules. And rules can be something like I'm going differentiating apples from oranges to essentially distinguish it for a grocery store, which could be one rule like red versus orange as a color. Is it solvable by simple rules? That's question one. The second one is what is the scale of my problems? Am I launching this to 5 customers, 20 customers, a million people, or a billion people? And if the answer for both of these questions is yes, so it's solvable with simple rules, yes, you don't need AI yet. We can build reliable, deterministic rules or conditions into our system, which will deal what we need to collect the data until our problem is big enough for it to not be solvable by simple rules. The second one is that if I am launching it for 5 customers and all I care about is making sure the customer experience for those 5 people is good enough, my data more likely or my problem more likely would not be as complex yet. And so I think the scale of where you're launching this also justifies the need for machine learning.
And I think you mentioned a few things there. So there is probably before we go further, just a quick level set. So I would imagine there's quite a lot of terms being thrown out. So there's artificial intelligence, there's machine learning, there's kind of robotic process automation. Do you want to give us maybe just a quick kind of a couple bullets of how to think of those things so we have that context for the rest of the session?
Absolutely. So when I say machine learning or artificial intelligence at a very primal level, it's just about pattern recognition. You have a bunch of data, you have some patterns in that data that you can teach a kid to learn, for example. Like when I go to my 5-year-old nephew, I can tell them, hey, if it's red and if it's slightly smooth on the surface, if it's round, it's an apple. If it's orange, if the surface is jaggedy, it's an orange. And similarly, this is basically what we do with machines. We input a bunch of rules in machines and hope that they learn it. And then we calculate how good is the machine in learning it. Did it see any data that it did not learn from? And then we get into more challenges and so on. But if you had to take away one thing, is that if your data has any kind of patterns, machine learning can help do that pattern recognition. I just want to distinguish one thing. Similarly, in robotic processes, it's about understanding, just like humans do, about object recognition, which is, again, understanding a round object from a square one, and so on. and perception of your surroundings. So anything that a human does, we have now developed tech for machine to emulate, not as reliably, but it can do it. And so again, another question that I oftentimes recommend people to think about is that what is the level of precision you're looking for? If it is healthcare diagnostics, we have a scope of 0 mistakes. So most likely you will ask a machine, but you will need a human to verify. While if it is recommending whether your face looks happy or sad in an app that you're just having fun with, you can make some mistakes. And so that is also a distinguishing factor that people should care about.
Excellent. And when people are kind of identified, say they've got the business problem, they understand the complexity and the scale, do you recommend that they then look at kind of the technology to solve it first and then bring a team on board that can do it? Or do you need kind of the team first and then the technology? Like, what's been your experience?
Again, great question. I would say it depends on the complexity of the problem. I will give you one example. So some time ago, I was talking with one of the founders of Siri, which is now we all know, we all have it in our iPhones and we can ask it a question. And when Siri started out, usually there was no technology that already existed that you could talk to. It could understand speech, translate speech from text, process it, and reply to you in this amazing, awesome way. So in scenarios where you're building something from 0 to 1, you really need to understand the problem. You need to identify that nothing out there exists that can solve this problem, and then bring a team on board, a team of specialists who's worked in that area. In this case, the initial founding team of Siri had been researchers who had long worked in the area of conversational AI or conversational artificial intelligence, and they were brought on board to build it. Mm-hmm. Versus if it's a simpler problem, let's say object recognition for a robot that runs in a factory and chooses one object from the other, it's a simple problem. Solutions exist out there. You don't really need a team for it. If we are able to get one software developer who can understand the tools out there, which are a lot of tools, and we can definitely dive deeper into that. That's all you need for somebody to come in and really plug in that technology without really investing in that whole team right away.
Excellent. Excellent, and I think that's a great segue to my next question, in terms of picking AI team members. Like, what would be kind of the key attributes, skills, education, things like that you would look at? And maybe we can put the question in two contexts. As one where it's somebody like you just explained, it's kind of that almost generalist that can scour the environment and bring back the right tools and help integrate them. And then there's probably that the second piece could be those more sophisticated teams where you might need more people actually building something. So what's your experience there?
Yeah, Erica, you almost answered that question in the in asking that question, but I'm probably going to reiterate also. In building 0 to 1 things, what I look for is people usually who've had a very strong research background. And then I usually complement that with people who are executors or who are generalists, software engineers, who can pair up with this researcher and then actually execute it and bring it to product. And so if I have a takeaway is that if you have the money to get just one person on board, a strong full stack engineer is more value in any scenario than just somebody who can just do research and not really bring it to product. So in 0 to 1 scenarios where, like the Siri case we talked about, having like a suite of people, a strong researcher is indispensable in this case, because somebody who's not built something from scratch and really done the research and the due diligence, without that, the generalists would not be able to execute something. So you need somebody for the theory, and then you need somebody for the execution. For the second case, where we already have a solution out there, having a strong generalist who has some experience with machine learning, but doesn't really need to be an expert in machine learning, is a great starting point. And until you really evaluate how it did, until you evaluate whether the problem you're solving needs a budget that warrants for a larger team.
Gotcha. So it's a lot like building the rest of the startup. You kind of need somebody that can lay the foundation, and then you maybe need to upgrade the skills or expand or pivot to then take advantage of the next step of the growth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Just for my benefit, like when you say researcher, can you elaborate just a little bit on like what does that experience or education look like for somebody to be a researcher?
Absolutely. Researchers are people who, in the tech community, in machine learning, there are two folds of people. One fold is people who have gone to graduate school, got a master's or got a PhD, and have some experience of publishing the work that they do in peer reviewed journals or conferences. So these are people who typically will take a field and say, I want to move this field forward. I want to move the needle forward. That's one set of people. And this is what I mean by researchers. And when I say generalists or full stack developers, I actually mean applied researchers. So these are people who will say, oh, great, this is a new paper that person X published. I can write the code for it to actually implement it in my product, so that the paper, which is in theory on experiments and in small little snippets, can actually be scaled in a product which is available to users, is robust enough, has all the test cases, edge cases, has a nice UI, and all of that.
Excellent. What's your background?
I started out as a applied ML engineer, and then I went to grad school. I went to Carnegie Mellon, published a bunch of papers, and now I do both actually, where I publish like 40% of my time, and then 60% of my time I actually execute, build teams, and like work in the more applied space. So I think if you can get somebody who has both, which is usually people who've done a master's or an applied kind of a PhD, that's a win-win, because then they know the research, they can tackle that, and they can do the applied scenarios too.
Okay. And are you seeing organizations having to hire teams like this full time, or is there a model where you kind of bring, especially say, a researcher in for a period of time, and then once they've done their piece, like so it's more consultative as opposed to full time?
I've actually seen both. So interestingly, I've seen big organizations, all big organizations actually have the budget to hire full-time teams and bring them on board. However, for startups, I've seen two ways of operation. If the core mission of a startup is based on one of these technologies, so for example, Aurora, which is like one of the self-driving startups here in California, the core mission of that startup is to build self-driving cars. In that scenario, they will hire an entire team, specialists, researchers, as well as generalists in that area. However, in some other scenarios, I remember there were some Alexa applications back when I was building Amazon Alexa AI, where you could go in and say, Hugging Face, which is, or one of these open source search engines, is actually doing what I need and giving me an API which does the searching and the processing and the machine learning for me. Let me just plug in that API instead of building the wheel from scratch. So I would say, depending on what your core mission is, if the machine learning you need to use is a means to an end, by all means try to use these open source APIs. And that can be done with just one developer who knows how to plug things in. While if the core mission is actually building some machine learning technology that actually elevates the field you're in, then of course bringing a team and actually building it in-house makes more sense.
I'd love to actually just throw a question out to the audience. If you're comfortable saying, like, maybe just put in the chat window whether you're looking at AI as kind of a core part of your platform, or more, I guess, what I would classify as business efficiencies or peripheral AI, because that we can maybe tailor some of the next questions around that. core. Okay, we've got one. And
oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm super interested to see what the group is looking at, because I think it's very interesting to see the dichotomy in what folks are focusing on.
And maybe while we're waiting for a few more answers to come in, Shivani, in your experience, when you are going to different functions and suggesting AI or so on, are people more comfortable starting with kind of that, I would say, business efficiencies, like, for example, automation of meeting scheduling and assistance, or have you seen people just kind of like go full steam ahead saying, no, we need to build something that's more fundamental to our business?
Definitely starting with business functions, because I think people also need to prove the value of the investment they are putting into this sort of the AI field. And so unless it's a core function, just like the self-driving example I gave you, 70 to 80% of the startups, at least that I've seen over time, would start by just proving the case and seeing the value, letting the numbers inform whether the user engagement or the efficiency ad justifies the need to actually have a full-fledged team on it.
And I think probably companies are also like, AI, I think, is still a part of our brain that thinks of AI as Skynet and it's going to replace everything we do and we're all going to be out of a job. But I think introducing it in a more friendly way is like, hey, this is augmenting my job and taking away grunt work that I really don't actually want to be doing. That probably creates a more of a positive association with at least the term or the technology that can then allow the company to move forward and grow.
Definitely. My personal opinion is that AI, the state of AI right now, is almost at the level of learning of a 5 or a 6 year old. So imagine any task, if you had a 5 or a 6 year old helping you out, imagine any like thing that you would take from that, like the overhead that would go away is the same amount of overhead that would go away from AI. But AI is not even close to what humans do in terms of non-mundane tasks. Like, it can schedule your meetings, but it doesn't know what you discussed in the last one, or what your agenda is for this one, and whether what you want to follow up on. All of those things we still need to do. So I think thinking of AI as just taking away some overhead and improving the productivity or efficiency of your system is a great way to think about it. So both on an organizational level as well as on a product level.
Excellent. Thanks for the answers. It seems like we have quite a few that's peripheral transitioning to core. So it's kind of in line with what we just said. It's like that comfort level, the building the value and so on needs to be established first before you're going to disrupt some of your core business processes. So coming back kind of to teams and structure and so on, how are you seeing, like, is AI teams kind of working by themselves and coming then reporting to the business? Are they integrated really with the rest of, say, for example, if we take the core example, integrated very much with the core product team, developers, and so on? And then is there any kind of organizational structures there that companies should look out for or think about when they design the working relationships here?
Great question. And I think there are different schools of thoughts on this. Some people just like AI teams to be in a silo, come up with something and then give it over to the UI or the product teams to actually integrate it in the product. From my perspective, I think everything should be end to end. And I'll give you one example, which will really, really showcase the power of machine learning. In building everything end to end, we can actually design systems in a way that systems are actually influencing each other in positive ways. So, for example, when you're on your phone doing your autocorrect and you're typing a message and then it annoyingly replaces one word with another, and this other word, let's say, replaced cat with mat, and I always talk about my cat, but I never talk about a mat, but it for some reason decides to replace it and it's super annoying. So you see that 1 or 2 times after you correct it, it stops happening. And the only thing that could make it possible was this product insight, which said, hey, if let's one give the user an accommodation to edit something in the window that they're seeing, where they can actually edit the word that they meant to say with this different word if we replaced it. And then internally, machine learning is actually routing that feedback that you give and retraining those models to say, hey, Erica uses cat all the time, like stop translating it to Matt because it's gonna like add this overhead for her. And this is just one example, but you can imagine this everywhere. So in a normal factory setting, if a worker is trying to classify goods in one way from the other, and then they keep seeing that this machine learning algorithm keeps getting it wrong, if we don't have this end-to-end integration or an ability to translate this feedback and complete the cycle, we probably would not unlock the actual power of machine learning. And so, yes, I think while the teams can be separate, there needs to be a very good cross-functional relationship for any end-to-end startup or a product to be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Feedback loop is phenomenal, phenomenally important. Yeah. I think anybody that has a that sometimes types messages in a second language has started seeing things being
Right?
improved. Like there's a couple words that now they replace it with my Afrikaans words as opposed to trying to fix my English, which I'm not typing in at that point. So that's a lovely
Exactly.
example. Lovely example. Um, and then a little bit more digging onto this feedback loop. Are there any tool like additional AI or machine learning specific feedback tools or so on that you can recommend companies use, or is it really kind of the same way you would feedback any other bugs or fixes through the product?
Yeah, I think at least in my experience, I've always built these. These are simple to build. If you have any out of the box machine learning solution, essentially it's about taking these deltas almost in your data and triggering a retraining of your models or your backend system. So however, I think, and I haven't tested it recently, but I know that Amazon AWS used to provide a bunch of these out of box tools. I remember they had a library for vision and they had a library for natural language processing. And so I think if you have any such tool to your dispense, triggering retrainings is something any developer would be able to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent, excellent. I'm just gonna. I see somebody has put a question for us in the chat window. So, which degree grads you find the best to turn into machine learning data scientists, or where should we focus our recruiting efforts? I'm gonna ask that one now because it's probably top of mind for a lot of other people as well.
Yeah, and I think recruiting has definitely been one of my biggest challenges when I build the teams, especially if you're going from peripheral to core, which is true for a lot of people. I think if you talk about full stack engineering, somebody who has had experience in applying machine learning to different places, these can be like graduate schools here. Even I know graduate schools in Canada. I have a lot of friends from Montreal, University of Toronto, and all of these places. I think these days machine learning programs at graduate schools are doing a tremendous job of preparing people for jobs. So I think looking at specifically machine learning programs, data analytic programs, new grads especially are great for this peripheral to core transition, where you can basically help them build out your initial stack and then bring on somebody more experienced over time as you're investing more in that particular direction. So yeah, that's a very general advice, but I think it becomes more focused once I understand more about what the particular function of the team is or what the mission of the company is. So yeah, but it's a hard challenge to build a good team in the right budget.
Yeah, and I was actually just going to go to the budget question. It's like I assume with the huge demand for these skills, like even graduate or new grads are not cheap.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. Like, I think people have invested a huge amount to actually get the graduate education, both in terms of the money as well as the time. And so, definitely, I can expect a delta when you go from like an undergrad who's just had computer science experience to somebody who's actually gotten some more of these skills.
Absolutely. And are you finding, like, I know in tech in general, staff turnover and sometimes it's so on is a challenge. Are you finding kind of people in this specific with these skills, do they stick around? Like, what's their average tenure at a company? Just in your experience, obviously,
Yeah.
I'm sure the question could, or the answer could vary a lot for people, but do they
Yeah.
stick around, or they're flight risks?
I mean, I can talk about me. Like, I'm not like it's so varied. But as an ML engineer who's worked in some of these companies, I think if the project is challenging enough and if the scope is good enough, and the I guess like the perks and everything that you get is competitive to the industry, like we stick around. Like, I love a good challenging project, and so I would oftentimes compromise other things just to have the scope or a problem that I can solve, which will change the world or whatever. And so startups are exciting because of that. And so really, if the founding team and the peers that you're working with, if those are A players, people love to work with those. So I think already starting being very mindful of building a team that has this culture of excellence, and then trying to lure people based on that rather than fleeting things like packages or I don't know money you offer, which can change or vary, is probably a good strategy. But I speak from my experience, so this could be different for different people.
And how about physically in the same area? Obviously now with COVID, most of us are working remotely, but um, the effectiveness of the team, do you feel that there has to be a kind of a physical proximity, or have you seen these skills kind of being hired more in more diverse locations because people are just more comfortable working remote? Like, does that still work, or do they really need to be close?
I think I think definitely that again, personal opinion also, because I would probably have to pull out numbers to actually quote metrics on this about the effectiveness of the org. I think some of it does suffer. Like, I'm sure you want to meet at some like maybe bi-monthly or something. But at least from my experience of building a team that has been remote, of working with a team that has been remote, I think it's effective. I think it can be accomplished. One data point I do have is that I worked in open source for a year or so, and open source is basically this community of developers that spread all over the world, and people who are building platforms or products or apps, and none of them have ever met each other, but they're just passionate about something, so they work for free, they code for free, and they basically build things for free. So there's this whole platform, Linux, Firefox, if you've ever heard of that browser, is an open source browser. And in doing that, I actually never met the 4 or 5 people I was developing with until we finished the project and wrapped it up, and then met up in Prague, and then said, "Oh, like this is how you look like." We never even did video calls. So I think if you have good processes, good documentation, good async or asynchronous processes in place, it can be accomplished, but it has to be very mindful. And so I remember, so I think I remember the only one thing my takeaway was from open source remote development was have good documentation. And we were very finicky about that, because when I checked out, and I was in India at the time, when I checked out at night, my Europe team came online. They would look at what I did, my updates, they would do their thing, leave updates for me, so that when I woke up, I was following up and so on. And interestingly, that gave us almost a 24-hour development cycle. So here we were doing twice the amount of work just because we had robust processes in place to transfer learnings across time zones.
Excellent. Yeah, that's phenomenal. But I think that you just pointed like the documentation, the communication, and like what is our rules of the road? How are we developing? what's our processes. You don't lose information or you lose code. You don't override it. You like don't do double work. Like it. That seems governance is close to my heart. So
Yeah.
that's music to my ears. We're coming up to our kind of opening up for Q&A. So if you guys want to add, if anybody wants to add some questions into the chat window, or you can, when we get to it, you can unmute yourself and ask it live as well. Definitely very looking to hear what you want to still cover. I'll kind of, one of my last questions we can touch on is just within tech companies, there is really a attitude or a culture of like, let's move fast, let's break things, build it, break it, reinvent, so on. Are those concepts also applicable in when you're looking at AI, or does there have to be a bit more planning or structure within this?
Yeah, AI has definitely a longer runway than your typical software development or any other development processes. And the reason I say that is because we have to be very mindful of curating the right data. The data has to be representative of anybody who will be using your technology. And then once you create the right data, you have to be very mindful and thorough in the experimentation, because the metrics that you use to evaluate the model you build on this set data should actually be proxy to the actual problem you're solving. And so in doing that, I would say it's not as much move fast as it can be with if you're building a website and you just want to test like a user interface with users quickly and iterate over it. However, there can be instances where you can say, I have a 6 months runway where I want to do 3 launches. So the way we do it in machine learning is we start with a rule-based system first, usually, which is, I know this is not going to solve things and it will break things, but here's what I have. I'm going to use this to open it up to my users or open it up to the problem I'm solving, see how many times it fails, collect that failure cases, collect the success cases, and use that to build a model which is improved and better than this rule-based model. So I think it's more process oriented in that way. I don't know if this answers your question, but it's slightly move fast, but also move fast with caution.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think there could probably be a whole different session like this on data.
Exactly.
The completeness, I think there was a session previously on ethics. So
Yeah.
I think data would be a great one to elaborate, because like you
Even
said.
even the life cycle of how you develop a model is like, I think that this last sentence that I said, there could be 3 different sessions out of it alone. So yeah.
Excellent. Okay, Danielle put a question for us in the window. Would you recommend the AI team within a company to create their own internal AI principles? Have you seen any successful ways for startups to operationalize their AI principles?
Yeah, I think it's great to have a North Star. In the way that I interpret principles is a North Star for AI to go after. And I have seen startup like teams that started out with a huge mission where their principles were, say, for example, reduce overhead from the user, user first, and something like that. And then you basically build your tech around it. And so I think if your mission is, if your core mission becomes AI and it's not just a peripheral thing anymore where you basically solve a problem as it comes, having a North Star really helps ground AI engineers to productionize things. One drawback which I would definitely want to share with the group to be wary of when you're building an AI team, especially a core AI team, is often research scientists get over indexed on publishing their research, which means when you publish a lot, you're also taking away time from productionizing it or actually executing it in product. And so to be mindful of that and recognizing that, hey, 20% of our time will go in publishing because it's great for branding, it lures more talent, so great, but that'll be just 20%. So recognizing that from the get-go is definitely very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how do organizations reconcile the publishing versus kind of maintaining the IP? Is there any kind of friction in that scenario?
Yeah. I guess it's again, I think that would be a part of the AI principles. Like at least everything I've worked on, we publish most of our work. So I think most of the projects I've worked on over the last 2-3 years, we've published a lot. So it depends on and I think it also depends on the people. So it depends on which teams you go to. I know there's some teams who really are building the next generation of AI, say in Apple, and are very secretive and want to patent things before they publish things. So that is also a way to go. It really is a personal, I guess, conscience issue. Like, where do I see my brand evolving? There's some brands that evolve in community just because they publish a lot and they have a huge name in the research community, which also helps them attract great talent because they're publishing a lot. While there's some brands who are super secretive and would not publish a lot and just patent things, but they also attract a lot of talent because there's engineers who thrive on the fact that they actually were inventors on a patent. So yeah, it goes either way.
Yeah. And it sounds like those would be like when you're looking to hire a team and specific individuals, that's probably something that really needs to be set. The expectation needs to be set up front because, like you said, some people will be very interested in having their work published.
Yeah.
And if that goes with your organizational brand, that's fantastic. It's really something to highlight. In other cases, that may not be the case, and people may actually like working on the secret things that's just going to blow people's mind, but they don't necessarily get published. So just sounds like a great piece to be upfront with in your postings and your hiring.
Yep.
Erica and Shivani, I have a question actually as a follow-up to that. Shivani, you advise a lot of startups and founders, especially in the early stages. Following up on kind of like the 20% is basically for publishing. Are there any ways that you've seen kind of like working best when it comes to minimizing friction between team members? So kind of like within the I team and the CS team and a sales team and all that. Like what are some of the best practices from your experience that we need to be mindful of?
I guess if honestly, if you can elaborate a little bit more on friction, which areas do you see as frictions here?
Maybe kind of like just more so with between team members feeling like, oh, like the AI team gets to kind of like 20% of their time just to publish, or maybe their work. How should they work with the product team, or kind of like it in order so that everyone is collaborative and on the same page.
Great question. And in my experience, actually, we lean a lot on the marketing team or the product team to one inform the direction of the research. And so a lot of times you will see that the co-authors or co-inventors on a lot of these papers and patents are people from all cross-functional orgs because we rely a lot on, say, product teams to inform direction, but then on the marketing team to actually use that as a resource and an artifact to attract more people as well as more talent towards the product. So I think if 20%, when I say 20% maybe is the role of the AI team to publish, it actually really translates as 20% of the org's focus or the company's focus is going to be in innovation. And that just means that every function of the company is going to be spending some part of their time in supporting or curating that innovation. So it really just comes down as a company culture, I think, if that percentage of the time is given out from the get-go.
That's a really good point. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions from the floor?
If not, I have more questions. Requests more so. Kind of like, given that you're very active in the space, and I know that you also mentor a lot of aspiring machine learning professionals as well. So what I was wondering is if any of us here are hiring, or if you see like any talents that are looking for positions, would we be able to play a little matchmaker here?
Absolutely. Oh my God, yes. That is one of my biggest passions. I have so many people who are excited. And I usually do that. I usually try to reach out. If I see a position open and I know I always have like 10 people at hand who are looking for something, who are motivated enough to connect with me, reach out to me, be persistent about it. And so I'd love to, if there is any teams here that are looking for something, we can definitely like have a small Google Doc with a bunch of jobs that you're looking for. And I can definitely try to share that in my network. I'd be more than happy to.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. I know that a lot of people here have already started thinking about their own job descriptions. I'll coordinate that with the team, and then we can share that with you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right. Anyone else would like to ask any more questions? Looks like we're good. We covered.
I'm just typing, sorry.
Go ahead, Scott.
Why don't I just say it? Curious how you might go about messaging, the percentage of your development spend you'd put towards publishing when you're, investor facing and saying, I want to use your funds and I want to take 20% of it and not write code.
Yeah.
Like, is there a good way to say that? Or like, how do I not scare people off with that?
Yeah. Great question. I think what would work is probably projecting the business side of things that will come out of this innovation. Percentage time spent usually works well. I know that in the case of a lot of conversational AI startups, they usually do that, hey, this is the tech. If we were supposed to ship it and then get X, Y, and Z users, this is the revenue we'd make. So I think you really have to play like the visionary side of the entrepreneur in that sense and have a clear map. And which is why I think having a North Star is good, having a clear idea of what this 20% time is going to be spent on and not just keeping it open-ended is probably a good way to anchor the team as well as rally the investors to say this is actually going to help the product in the long term, as opposed to take away funds from code into God knows what.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it might also speak to source of funds too. Just in at least in our experience so far, the Canadian money is much, 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 much more conservative than American money. So it might be a bigger problem north of the border than it is south of the border.
Yeah, that's a great point actually, and that speaks to this for sure, because I think out here it's like if you're doing anything machine learning, here's the money, like go do what you may, and so definitely there's some difference there for sure.
Yeah, I wonder if it's in Canada, it might be again one of those things where the pilot projects in the beginning, or the getting your feet wet with AI and machine learning in the business efficiency side, and then improving out so that when it comes to we're transitioning to core AI, your investors already know you've got experience, and this is not something new and risky. It's still new, but it's not. It's been de-risked a little bit because I've been exposed to smaller amounts along the way in terms of investment in it, as opposed to maybe the big bang ask when you're trying to transition your core to more AI.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, because prototypes are great. You don't really have to build all the ML to actually woo the investors to say, this is the tech we want to be behind. And so in a lot of cases, even in my experience, when I wanted funding for a project or just headcount for a project, which equals funding in like the big tech terms, I would just build a prototype. It would be a dirty prototype. It would be very rule based. And I'd be like, here's what I can build if you give me this much money, but only 10 times better. And so when people visually see it, it's a different ball game. And I know Siri founders actually did that too. They went and they blew away the minds of Apple folks before they were acquired by just like this small prototype, which just worked and did something they never imagined could be done. So yeah, prototypes and small increments to before the big ask, I think is a great point.
If I could piggyback on that a little bit, because I'm curious now. I've spoken with some of you, and I know that some of you are fundraising and will be fundraising soon. Could we get a quick thumbs up, if you will be fundraising in the next 3 to 4 months or are fundraising right now? Just want to do a quick count here. so I can actually see. Okay, all right, that's good to know. Maybe we'll get more US representation when it comes to the funding session, so we
Yeah.
can have a conversation here. Okay, well, with that, I am afraid that's all the time we have for today. Shifani, Erica, thank you so much for such an insightful session. And thank you everyone for attending and for your questions and for participating. I would love to learn from everyone about how you think this session went and what your takeaways are. So we will drop a quick short survey in the chat. If you can take like 30 seconds or like 15 seconds even to just let us know what you think. And I do take this very seriously. So if there is anything that I can do to make your life easier while you're in this program, let me know and we'll make that happen. Okay, then. And also a friendly reminder that we have funding set aside to subsidize your projects, be it kind of like technical or on the business side. If you haven't already submitted your project request to me, please do so ASAP, because this funding must be used by the end of May 2021. I am so excited to see what we can accomplish together through this program. Thank you again, Erica. Thank you for your support. Shifani, thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
All right.
Thanks for
Goodbye,
having us.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.